You're listening to Cornerstone West Los Angeles.
I am ready for that, though, aren't I? Okay, we can do the identity crisis later. We're in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's what we do during this time in the service. We get together as a family, we learn from the Bible, and usually it's kind of verse by verse through a book in the Bible. The Bible is made up of a bunch of books. And at this point, we're in a book called Ecclesiastes, which, if you want to see it, the red books in front of you are Bibles. They're called Pew Bibles because they're in the pews. And on page 553 is the start of this book called Ecclesiastes. And it's a different sort of book. If you've been around, you've seen why. The guy calls himself the preacher. This person calls himself the preacher, and he's talking less like a Christian pep talk and more kind of like an angsty philosophy professor that sort of wants to ask you really penetrating questions that you're not really comfortable with. And so that's the book of the Bible we're in. So it's been an interesting time. And really, his question so far, if you kind of have been with us, and you can just sort of skim the first bit of the book, and you'll see it pretty clearly. His question so far has been, what are the ways that you try and hide from reality? Like, what are the ways you kind of play pretend with what life is really like as a human being? And the limits that are on you, with your finitude, with your mortality, with the fact that you can't really control your life. That's been his dominating metaphor. You see the word in the book, vanity. The base word is vapor, and that's the idea we've come back to again and again and again. Like, life is like smoke. It comes and goes really quickly. It's fleeting. You can't control it. You can't manipulate it. You can't anticipate it. If you try and shape it or move it, it actually defies you. So if you try and push it, it curls around back behind your hands, as if to say, you can't do that. This is what life is like as a human being. And what he's trying to get at is that you're never going to get any joy in life if you fight that. You're only going to get joy in life if you embrace it. If you embrace being human, what you're created to be, under a good and a loving God. So that's the idea behind the book. And the main problem that he's been dealing with so far is that we typically try and hide from that. We try and do other things. We convince ourselves that we can find something that can give us some control, like some guarantee of outcome, some kind of guarantee of satisfaction. I put this in, I know this is going to come back out. That's what tends to happen to us. And while a lot of us, I think, know people who have these sort of very easily, they're easy to see, these coping mechanisms people have with life. And they're easy to see through, that won't work, why is she doing this, that won't work, why is he doing that? At the same time, I think all of us are looking for something in our natural human state that will actually work. Okay, it's not those things, but is there something out there that really can get me some control? Is there something out there that can get me, that I can pursue that isn't just plain pretend until reality shows up, but I really can get a little bit of purchase on what's going to come out of my life? And so where we've been is this preacher taking us on a tour of the main ones people use that they think might actually work. And so he says, it's basically a tour of failed experiments. He goes through experiment one. Okay, maybe if I know enough. What if I know enough, can I get control over my life? And he runs that experiment. He's a smart guy. The answer is no. The next one is, what if I, pleasure? If I experience enough, can I guarantee certain outcomes? And he runs that experiment. The answer is no. And today, he sort of says, well, maybe it's not knowing or feeling. Maybe it's doing that will get me some gain, some satisfaction, some ownership over my life. Maybe hard work or enough achievement can get me some control. And that's the final stop, and we'll see his conclusion. So we're going to read Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 9 through 26. It'll be up on the screen. It's also in the Pew Bibles, starting page 553 at the bottom. It's a long chunk, but here's what he says. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and all the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So I turned to consider wisdom, and madness, and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceived that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a striving after wind. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. This is the word of the Lord. Now, if you've been here, we've covered some of this already. It's a long passage. We did kind of the middle section a couple weeks ago when we talked about wisdom. Last week, Scott talked about the beginning section. But today, we're focusing on work, on toil, on achievement, on all the activity and effort you expend in your life. And there's a way you can see that in the midst of his talk about wisdom and talk about pleasure, there was this idea of work, of achievement, and how all these things conspired together to see if he could get some gain, some control over his life. And when you take them all together, you see the experiment. Can you achieve enough through hard work to make life what you want it to be? That's the grand question. And so, we're going to learn three things. The promise of work, the problem with work, and the provision of work. 3 P's. Nailing it. Okay. First, the promise of work. He opens in verse 9. He says, I became great. I surpassed all who came before me. What's he saying? He's saying this. I accomplished everything I set out to accomplish. I achieved everything I wanted to achieve. And in that way, so much so that I surpassed more than everyone else before me. I was the highest achiever. And that's the experiment, right? So if I can achieve everything I'm working on, if I can actually accomplish all of this, I can find meaning and purpose and control over my life. This is his idea. Now, that doesn't have to be a job. When you hear the word work, you think, okay, well, job. For a lot of people, it's tied up in career. Absolutely true. But it could also be a passion project. It can be your personal life. It can be a family. It can be this sort of conglomeration where the job is only part of it, where it's going to be a job and family and personal life. I'm going to have it all by achieving. There's a million iterations of this. What he's after is not necessarily what you're doing with your job. He's after what you're doing with your life. Everyone is working on something. You have something that you're working on. Just think of all the stuff you do, all the activities throughout your day. What's all that for? What's that aimed at? What's the goal? What are you trying to accomplish or achieve through those things? And you have a list of maybe one big, maybe several medium work projects you have, things you're trying to achieve. That's what he's aiming at. That's what the preacher's after. You expend a lot of effort in your life. What's that going to? Okay, he's homing in on that. And so, the thing about the preacher that's really fascinating is that he actually pulled it off. He's one of the few people, not everyone has all of this. If you go through this, he's got enough smarts to do all the learning. He's got enough capital behind him to get all the experiences. And now you get the smarts, the learning, the skill set, and the hard work ethic together, and he gets all this achievement. Not a lot of people are this well-rounded, but he basically got to the place you and I are trying to go in whatever we're working on. Maximum achievement in the projects of his life. And the rest of the passage explains why this doesn't get us, and didn't get him, what we hope it will. And as he explains that, he kind of reveals the promises that the things we work on make to us, that we hope that they'll achieve for us. And there's two main ones you'll see: satisfaction and significance. Those are the things he hoped work would give him, and they're the things we hope work will give us. Satisfaction and significance. Satisfaction is kind of an easy one. I think it's pretty easy to see. There's this idea that when you have something you're working on that you really care about, that you believe in, you know, it's not just sort of clocking in, clocking out, but it's a real personal issue for you, you know, something that you find a lot of personal stake in, that you're supposed to be able to enjoy doing it. That's just the assumption. Like, you're supposed to go do the thing that you're called or you feel like you really want to do, and it should be full of joy, and that you whistle while you work, and then you come home, and then you relax after a good hard day's work. This is this sort of idea. And you see that a lot, especially in talk about career. So like that old line, you know, find a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Because that's not just a job. Find a cause, find a life project that you're working on, that you're passionate about, and there's this idea that once you find that thing, everything sort of coheres. Like, everything comes together, and everything, you get satisfied. There's a satisfaction in it. And that's what work is supposed to do, these projects, to satisfy you internally. They make this promise that there's like a kind of achievement out there that's life-giving for you. It energizes, it gives and doesn't take. You know, and that's why it's almost embarrassing these days in our culture. It can be kind of embarrassing if you have to admit, like, you haven't found your work yet, your passion project yet, your life-affirming career yet, because it's basically saying, like, oh, I'm still wandering in the desert at this party full of people who have found their life cohering around their work project. There's this satisfaction is what we want. And the preacher comes in and basically says, no, like, not even a little. And just one spot. In verse 22, he asks, you know, what has a man from all the toil with which he toils? And in verse 23, he says, all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation, and even in the night his heart doesn't rest. Say, now look, any realistic view of work, of energy expenditure, of activity in life is going to lead you here. Work is hard. That word sorrow, the base idea is pain. Work is painful. It saps your energy. It drains you of vitality. Putting work in on anything, no matter how much you care about it, takes a toll on you every time. You never, like, that thing where it's like, I came back, I had more energy than I started with. That's not very real. And that's when things are going super well at work. Like if you view your job that way, that's like the best case scenario is all it did was steal your life force. Like, because then he goes on and says it's also frustrating. That basically means there are going to be times when you do put work in, it does sap you of energy, you do expend a lot of yourself, and then all the outcomes go sideways. So like the project falls apart with nothing you could do. Office politics sort of stabs you in the back. Or if it's family or your personal life, people don't respond the way you thought they were going to respond. You know, kids don't listen for the 1,000th time. Parents just don't understand. It happens all the time, this vexation. And so at night, in the superficial sense, you can't sleep, your heart doesn't rest, because you're wondering if the next day is going to be just pain or pain and vexation. This is work. Nicole Cooper, a very successful track athlete, and then she became a writer. And she wrote this article, How My Passion Absolutely Felt Like Work. And she said, basically, if you hear someone say, love your work and you'll never work a day in your life, you're either talking to a liar or someone who wants you to pay them to be your life coach. And she says, the work I cared about most is the genuine projects of my life that I was really passionate about were the worst parts of my life and still are today. And she said, like, she went back to track a lot. She says, in everything she was most passionate about, she said, these were the areas in which I shed the most tears, reevaluated my life choices the most often, found the most elements that I dreaded doing, and most often wanted to quit when things got hard, which they did every week. She's saying, like, look, hard work, passion, even feeling like you enjoy your job, that's all well and good, but it doesn't give you this, like, life, energy, soul satisfaction that you think it's going to. It's still work. And in as much as you build your life and sort of lean on this idea that work's going to give you that soul level satisfaction, that's how much it's going to break you down. David Brooks in the New York Times was overviewing a survey of like work satisfaction and career satisfaction. And he made this one-off comment, this note. It was a very large survey. He said, there's no income level at which people are not desperate for meaning. And that's different than you think. See, what you hear is, yeah, money doesn't make you happy. Fair enough. But what he's after, and what the survey sort of showed, is bigger than that. If the returns that you got on your project didn't give you the meaning you wanted. For a lot of people, that was money. And so, higher income level, still desperate for meaning. But whatever you're working on, what he's pointing out is, any returns on that, family returns, personal life returns, cause making a difference returns, because all of these across jobs, across life satisfaction, left people still desperate for meaning. The most impactful person was still as desperate for meaning as the person who made the least dent. The person with the best family was still as desperate for meaning as the one whose family was falling apart. Whatever your project is, no matter how well it goes, if you're looking for it to satisfy you at that level, it's going to break you. You're going to become desperate. And so it promises this soul level satisfaction, work does, but it doesn't give it to you. And that's actually the light one. The big one that he points out is significance. It promises satisfaction, that doesn't work. It also promises significance. This is also pretty easy to understand. You want to make a difference. You want to have some kind of lasting impact. You want it to matter that you were alive. That's a pretty simple, pretty okay thing to want. And yet, you see it in these weird ways. So you look at like a university campus. Drive around LA, and you see lots of names. They're all names of stores. Then go to like a college campus, or go to some government campuses, and you see different names of people on all the buildings. Like, who are all these people? And why are there all different names on all these buildings? Well, they're donors. They're people who gave a bunch of money to build the building, or at UCLA to earthquake retrofit it. And because they gave so much money, their name goes up on the building. And that's fascinating to me, because you could have just as easily given the money and just let them build the building. Why is there a name on it? Well, because it wasn't just about, wanting to provide a safe place in earthquakes for people to be educated. Of course it was, it's true. But it was also about some sense of legacy, that what you did, the work you put in, the sacrifices you made to make the money you made, that then you gave away, made some sort of lasting difference in the world. Without you, that building wouldn't be there. Without you, that education might not have happened. This is the idea. And that's a little old-fashioned. Most people that I talk to today aren't looking to get their names on buildings, or they just don't have the wherewithal, like most of us, I would assume. If not, lucky you. Most of us today, New York Times survey, another survey. I love the surveys these days. It was college students at Ivy League schools. And they essentially were talking about job prospects after college. What do you want to go into, and how does it relate to your major? And one of the things they found out was that college students, it was a very high percentage of them, only had two concepts of career. They were either going to go into what we could colloquially call the high money, no love career, or the no money, high love career. So basically, and this is just really weird, there's a lot of different careers out there. I mean, there's tons. But these very high capacity people, they were either going to go be, forgive me if you're one, investment bankers. That was their typical example of high money, no love. Or they were going to work for a nonprofit, no money, high love. And what they pointed out was that, do you see, these are for us at least, these are the last two sermons. How are you going to get above the sun? How are you going to get some gain in your life? How are you going to mold the smoke? Well, either high money, no love, pleasure, experience, or today, making a difference. No love, or high love, no money. I'm going to go make a difference in the world. I'm going to work for a nonprofit. For some reason, it's always nonprofits or investment banking. I don't know why those are the only two categories. But I'm going to go work for a nonprofit. I don't want to just be a teacher. I want to teach for America. I'm going to make a difference. There's nothing wrong with that. I love Teach for America. But do you see what's happening here? And what we would point out is that, well, the preacher would say, no. All of you want to make some sort of difference, want to leave a lasting impact, want to have some significance from the things you work on in your life. And he says, unfortunately, it's not going to happen. This one's way worse. I won't read all of it, but starting in verse 16, as of the wise, as of the fool, there's no enduring remembrance. Seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. He's talking about wisdom because he had just finished all these big projects, these big building projects, these big, society-changing things he's done in his kingdom. He says, does it matter? I'm just going to die. Everyone's going to forget it. And then he goes on in verse 18, so I hated my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he's going to be wise or a fool. But he's going to be master of all for which I toiled. In other words, this guy could just undo everything I've done. There's no guarantee that anything I've done will last, and ultimately everyone's going to die, so it's all going to be forgotten anyway. Like, it's just really a bummer. And that's his point. What he's saying is basically, again, it's very confrontational. It's very angsty philosophy professor. But he's saying, look, the things you think will make a difference won't. They just flat out won't. If they do, it will be incredibly short term, and then eventually it's all going to be forgotten. The buildings with your name on it are going to crumble into dust and become archaeological relics, and no one's going to be able to read your name because no one's going to speak English. No one's going to remember this. In other words, everything we do is by nature temporary, and there's no way around it. Ernest Becker wrote this really important book in the mid-70s called The Denial of Death. People still read it all the time today. And he basically says, his point is, our entire society, like everything we do, is built as a defense mechanism against the reality that we're all going to die. Like that's why everything is here, is because we just don't want to think about the fact that we're going to die. And that all of us individually have our ways of denying it by what he called immortality projects. We all find these projects, we all work on things that we think are going to last beyond our death, or demonstrate that we made some sort of impact that won't get erased by our death or by time or by whatever. And you see that at work all over the place. Is this, work promises significance, and so we got to figure it out. But see, the more you build your life on this stuff, the more it breaks you. A couple years ago in the LA Times, they were interviewing this woman who is a mom of 2 kids and a really successful up-and-coming writer and producer in the film and television industry. Essentially, they were interviewing her because they're like, you have it all. Like, how'd you pull this off? And she said in the middle, I do have that middle of the night phrase, it's not enough, always in my head. Life isn't adding up to enough. I'm not doing enough. Or if I died tomorrow, did any of it matter enough? What's she doing? She's working on her project. She's got an immortality project. It's about having it all or having something or whatever it is for her. We all have one. And she's saying, and because it's not giving me enough significance, I can't see if it matters enough yet, so I'm up at night thinking about it. I can't sleep. Her heart can't rest. And you might not lose sleep, but you have one of these. There's something you're working on, you see, and we think it promises us significance. It doesn't have to look like, career. You just want to be able to say that what you did mattered. It could be family, it could be a cause, it could be just being a nice person in a society that's lost its niceness. It could be a million different things. But you're working on something that you think is going to make some sort of genuine, long-lasting difference beyond your own mortality and finitude. You're looking for something you can point at and say, do you see that? Like that I can rely on. That will outlast me. That's actually going to make a difference. It's bigger than me, and I can lean on that. And the preacher says, look, wise or fool, everyone's going to die, and all of it's going to be forgotten. And even if they last a few generations, who knows who's in charge of it once you're dead? In other words, your immortality project has an expiration date. No matter how good you are, how hard you work, it can't provide significance like that. Tim Keller talked about being in England one time and seeing the grave of a famous English writer who had really tried to be in that great British tradition of writers and struggled his whole life. And his tombstone said, I just plowed water. Imagine plowing, in a field, plowing water, where the water just circles back behind you and who knows you were there. He's saying, look, this is the situation we're in. And the more you look to that, to bring you significance, the more you're broken by it. One more, just because I love the illustrations. Carrie Fisher, I read this years ago. Carrie Fisher she was being interviewed, and she had this great line. She said, celebrity is just obscurity biding its time. She said, I grew up in a famous family, she said. I'll read it. Eventually, all fame will disappear. I watched that happen, and so I never wanted to go into show business because I saw that heartbreak. And all our immortality projects are just obscurity biding their time. We're plowing water. And in as much as you need that significance and build on that significance is going to give you, the more it's going to break you down. And you're going to experience that heartbreak and that fear. And so that's the promise of work. What you work on in your life, look, it can be genuinely rewarding. People can be better off for the life you live, the work you do, the projects, you can genuinely bless people for things. But if you're looking to it to provide that deep soul-level satisfaction, to provide some sort of lasting significance on your own terms, it's going to fail you. That's the promise of work. Point 2 is the problem with work. So, sorry, but it gets worse. In verse 22, because it gets deeper, it's really interesting what he does. In verse 22, what has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? Now look, this is easy to miss, but if you look at it, this is the beauty of meditating on the Bible. You look at each word and kind of try and savor it a little. It's a really interesting phrase in there that he's trying to use to point out why we want soul-level satisfaction and significance from these things. He's not just showing us dead ends. He's showing us something deeper. The key is striving of heart. That word striving is the same word that he uses for striving after the wind. Remember trying to chase and catch wind or catch bubbles and put them in your bag. Doesn't work. It's just futile. But now that striving, he's put it really deep inside. In such a way that you're not just working with your body, he's saying. There's a way that you're working with your heart. You're working on something that you think will fix, will satisfy, will do something in your heart. And to me, that actually answers, it's a beautiful biblical answer from thousands of years ago for a really common modern problem that people have written a lot on. What happened to all our free time? In the 1930s, social scientists were genuinely worried about humanity because they noticed technology was increasing. The Industrial Revolution had passed. All sorts of economic things had changed. So all of a sudden, there's all this sort of compound interest in growing wealth and GDP in the country's going up and dishwashers. Like, what are we going to do with all of our free time? People are going to go crazy because they're not going to have anything to do. This is John Maynard Keynes, super famous economist in the 30s, said for the first time since his creation, man will be faced with this problem: how to occupy all the leisure that science, technology, and compound interest will win for him. In other words, this is a problem we got to fix. Is people are going to go nuts. They're going to have nothing to do because of technology. But now people are wondering what in the world happened. Like, we are far more productive than we've ever been as a human race. I mean, just the dishwasher, the laundry machines, and the personal computer save like billions of hours a year. I mean, just think about what everyone used to do. But then, like, what happened to all that leisure time we were supposed to have? And you look around and people don't have very good answers. It's like, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple years ago. Hillary Potkowitz wrote it, and she interviewed entrepreneurs and people from the tech field and academics and startup investors and all these different people from all these different walks of life, career coaches. And she said, you know what they all had in common? They said the best hour, the most productive hour in the week is 4 a.m. Get up at 4 a.m., get it done, and then work a full day. And then you're really going to get productive. And so Derek Thomas in The Atlantic is kind of looking at this, and he's like, John Maynard Keynes is thinking of a life with way less work and a lot more leisure, not a social competition to see who could maximize their pre-dawn productivity. And then he says, just looking at the data, a 2016 essay about why Americans should sleep less to be more productive appeals specifically to a readership that considers downtime a worthy sacrifice upon the altar of productivity. Basically what he's saying is, you get as much leisure time as you want. Your hearts aren't at rest, so you're just going to fill it up. You're going to sacrifice all that leisure time on the altar of productivity. Why do we fill it up? Why do you fill it up? Why do 5 generations, 6 generations ago, people were doing the dishes all by hand? A lot of us are too, we're in apartments. But there are no laundry machines, the cars aren't very fast, no computers, no like remote work, none of this stuff. And they're like living their life. And we're living life too. Why do we feel busier than them? What happened? And the preacher comes in from like 4,000 years ago and says, here's what happened. Even when you're not at work, your heart's at work. Your heart can't rest. That's why sometimes you use your free time to read productivity blogs. You know, like, what in the world? Like, I've got some leisure time. Let me learn how I can cram more stuff into my life. It's just a fascinating thing. You can arrange your life in such a way to make quicker progress towards your immortality project. Do you see what happened? This is the deep promise of work, is that it will make you whole. And so, if you have less work to do, you're not making a lot of progress on being whole. So when you have less work to do, you fill that time with working on more, working on something different, with a new project. He says your hearts aren't at rest. Leisure time isn't something we can handle. You know why? It's because we're working essentially to get back into Eden. That's what he was doing. Remember last week when Scott talked about all this work he's doing to build these buildings and reshape this society to the point where he's building, buildings and planting forests and even like sort of pseudo-creating people by getting all these slaves. He's basically trying to be God, making his own Eden, and it doesn't take. That's what we're doing. His work is trying to get back into Eden, and it's trying to fill your heart up. It's trying to fix your heart. And so it's fascinating when he says, this is the deep reason why you can't sleep. Literally, he says, even in the night, your heart can't lie down. Your body can lie down, but your heart can't lie down. Why not? Because you can only really rest. All of us can only really rest once we're inside the door. And as long as we're outside the door, you can try and sleep, but your heart's going to be awake. There's work under the work, and there's work under the rest. There's work everywhere. And so do you see what happens? Like every time you take one step closer to the promise, to the relationship you want, the career you want, the circumstances you want, to the satisfaction and significance you're looking for, the promise takes one step back. Because we can't work our way back into Eden. Nothing east of Eden is ever going to be the paradise that we want it to be. It's just not going to happen that way for us. And it's a lesson. A lot of us are Christians here. And so you've heard this before. Like, this is an idea that's not that unfamiliar. Oh, you shouldn't have idols, shouldn't do this. But no matter how many times you learn the hard way, isn't there this way that you should know better by now, but you don't? Where these things creep back in? And you find yourself just sort of having these things come in that begin to slowly dominate your life to the point where you still have ways your heart can't lie down. You're just not at rest. That's the problem with work, is that our hearts can't lie down. Now, what's the provision of work? Last. In verse 24, he does this weird hard turn, and all of a sudden, after hating life and everything being vanity, there's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? And we've looked at this last couple of weeks. And if you've been here, you've seen, basically he's saying each time the solution to the vexation, to the frustration, to the inability to get the kind of godlikeness that you want is not to find a new, better way to be immortal and omnipresent and omnipotent and have control over your life that's a vapor. No. Instead, the solution is to find joy as a limited human being who is not God, but who lives under God's loving authority. That's his answer. If the goal is to shape the vapor of life, to cobble together satisfaction and significance from yourself, you're always going to be broken and frustrated and just not have it. And then he says, but if you understand you're not in control, you can't know enough, you can't experience enough, you can't work enough to change that, you'll actually find joy in just being human with a good God. And it reshapes the fabric of your life. And that's going to affect your work. He wants you to enjoy your toil, not as a means of controlling your life, but as a gift of God. And the crux of this, that we haven't really talked about thus far, is in verse 25. It's this little phrase. This is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? And that means, it basically means this. You and I, we want joy in our life. There's no way around that. It's something that is sort of built into us. And we'll get to that in a couple chapters anyway. But the way to joy, the source of enjoyment, the way to actually have it is to be with him in his presence, enjoying what he gives in the moment. And what we almost always try and do is stack up joy, try and corral it and get it into sort of our own personal bank account to enjoy it later. In other words, we don't want to rely on God to give us joy. We want to get our own. It's much more, it feels more certain that way. And that way, I don't have to do things his way. It seems far better to just be God on my own and get my own joy than to follow him. But apart from him, who can have joy? This is his point, is if you do that, you're going to break your back. It's going to come down on you heavy. And I think for a lot of us, it is right now. There's a heaviness, a weightiness, a weariness to living this way. Call yourself Christian or not. And we come in here and we feel it sometimes. Or we leave here and we feel it. And he's saying it's because your approach to life is off. You're trying to ignore reality. You're playing pretend like you can actually pull this off, and it's breaking you the whole time. And that's the key to verse 26. At the end, it's such a weird verse. To the one who pleases him, should I call things weird? I don't know. For the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he's given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. There's a way of reading that. Again, on first glance, you sort of skim it and you hear, okay, so the bad non-Christian sinners are going to try and get stuff and then God's going to take it and give it to the good, godly Christian people. That's not what's happening, especially in the context of the book. Sinner here isn't necessarily the connotation we have. In the book of Ecclesiastes, in the context, a sinner is someone who's basically like the one who's striving and gathering and collecting and trying to gain and be godlike when they're just human. And who's the one that pleases God? Who's the one that's going to get all this stuff? That's the person who's not looking to strive and gain and get all this stuff. And so what you have is this really interesting sense that you have all these people who are going to try and be more than human and gather and get all this stuff. And God's going to let them try and give them over to it. And then they're going to die. And it's going to transfer ownership. Maybe to another sinner. But eventually, some of this stuff is going to hit someone who's actually pleasing to God, who understands I'm just human. What a great gift. I don't need to get any gain out of this. It's just wonderful that God gave it to me for right now. This is the verse, because there is no surplus to joy beyond joy itself. The good person isn't getting what the sinner wanted. Oh, the sinner wants all this gain, but God's going to give that gain to... No, the one who pleases God is just getting what God gives. And that's the issue. That's the change that we're looking for. How do you get there? How do you get to be the one that pleases God? Because, you might know this, but have you stopped working on your project? I tell you, I love you to death, but I do not care if you're a Christian for 1,000,000 years, if you've been coming to church every week, if you're super on fire for Jesus, if you're very, very spiritual. I just don't care. The question on the table is, are you still working on a project? Is that what's happening? Is that what your life's about? And if it is, regardless of what you say you believe in all these things, then what he's saying is that what you need to do is move from that to being someone who pleases God. Here's the problem, is that all of us are still working on a project. There's ways this creeps in. I'm a pastor, I got mine. This sermon's probably a little bit part of one of them. I don't know, this is complicated stuff. The human heart is crazy. But how do you get to be one who pleases God and therefore is freed up to reorient yourself to be just human with a good God and actually enjoy your life? And he says, he tries to get at what we know clearly. He leaves us at an impasse, in a sense on purpose. And this, I would say, this answer is the singular beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Everything in my life, everything in your life, you have to strive for. Everything. To make enough money to get food, to have friends, to not be, a social outcast, to get up and go to church, not sleep all day, to have any kind of accomplishment. Everything in life is striving. Everything in life is one rung to the next, one rung to the next. And a lot of us just take that and pour it right into religion. And so you come to church because you're like, cool, here, the other stuff didn't work. So here, here's what I'll do. No matter how spiritual you are or Christian you are or what have you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that if I can strive enough in my religion, if I can strive enough in my relationship with God, butter it up however you want, if I can strive enough, then you know what? I'm going to get some control over my satisfaction and my significance by learning the right spiritual lessons and making the right spiritual decisions and taking the right spiritual steps. I'm going to climb closer to that godly significance because that's the one that's going to work. And we just poured it in. You baptize striving, and all of a sudden you get a bunch of Christianity. But it's not Christianity. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, all you who are striving in your heart, whose hearts can't lie down, and I will give you rest. Be with me, not apart from me, and I'll give you rest." If you're striving under your relationship with Jesus, if your heart can't lie down as a Christian, it means you haven't really understood how he's going to give you rest. It means the penny hasn't dropped all the way down. Because how's he going to give you rest? There's a million ways to give someone rest, and a lot of us try them with each other, and they're wonderful things. I'm going to do all your grocery shopping for you, or I'm going to work your job for a week. Well, we can't do that one. I'm going to work your job for a week so you can take a vacation. I'm going to babysit your kids, for a week so you can just go somewhere quiet. I don't know. There's a million different ways you could do this. He could do all those things. He could give you all the kingdoms in the world and all the praise of mankind and make you the most famous person on the planet who's universally beloved. But how do you give rest to a striving heart? The biblical answer is that Jesus would take all of his rest, all of the Eden that he has, all of the relational in-the-doorness of that unity with God the Father and God the Holy Spirit, and he would just lay it down for you and me. He would trade his Eden so we could have it. He would give up his rest so we could enter into it. And then at the resurrection, he'd pick it up again and say, "Come on, follow me. I have so much rest for you." This is the gospel. Paul says it's the gift of God. By grace you've been saved, right? Not by works, so no one can boast. It's not your striving that gets this. It's not your work projects, your religious work projects that get you this. It has to be received. And so the Eden that you're looking to make, that you're working on, whatever your project is now something that you receive as a gift. That's the singular beauty of it to me. In a world full of striving, the one central thing that God wants to communicate to us about who he is and what the universe is really like is that it's a gift. It's received. And if you don't understand Christianity as something you receive, then you don't understand Christianity. It's the fundamental thing about us. We are people who receive. And out of that we live, out of that we work, out of that we move and have our being. Now that then is the gift that when you receive it, helps you receive all the other gifts. When you receive that gift as the central thing, so if the central thing in your life, if the central functional purpose of your existence, if your past, present, and future is caught up in the cosmic reception of a gift, that's going to kind of reorient how you look at the rest of your life and your world. You're going to be looking for gifts in other places too. It's going to be kind of a normal thing you begin to do because that's the central cosmic crux of the universe. And so it's going to train you to learn to receive even as you work, even as you live out your days at work and at play and in noble pursuits and in sitting down with a cup of coffee. All of these things, your fundamental posture in your heart becomes one of receiving, not of striving. So you become kind of like Psalm 127. The fascinating thing, it says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. He lets their hearts lie down." Now, this is a new kind of life. But notice what it's saying. This psalm isn't saying, don't build a house, don't lock your doors, definitely go to bed early and wake up late. That's not what it's saying. There are still houses to be built. There are still cities to be watched. There's still things to do in the morning and at night. The point is not that you need to take a nap and just relax, man. Well, some of you probably need to take a nap, so take a nap. But that's not the main point. The point is not take a nap. The biblical thing to do isn't to be passive and lazy. No, it's about how to change your perspective on all the things that are going on in your life. how to take them from the category of project and gain and put them into the category of gift. Wake up as early as you want. Get productive at 4 a.m. But it better be a gift, not a project for gain. And that will change everything for you. It's going to give you rest in your soul. Okay, so what do you do, just to make it a little more grounded? There's still work to be done. You still have stuff to do in life. In the Jewish tradition, I don't know how common it is now, but the Feast of Sukkot, that was a holiday, right around harvest. They would read Ecclesiastes during that. They would sow and reap and do all this work, and they'd bring it all in, and then they'd read Ecclesiastes, as if to say, understand that you didn't achieve any of this. This is all a gift. And then a couple months later, when they went back out to sow again, and start the whole process over again, they'd say, this is a gift too, the ability to be out here and do this. And so what do? At this point, you need to be taking all the things you're working on, all the things you want to achieve in your life, and you feel free to work hard, but don't work as gain. Work as gift. How does that look? Let me give you just some really, really quick 3 things that it'll look like in your life. When the gospel settles in and gives you some rest, it's going to look a few different ways in this aspect of life. 1, you're going to find yourself enjoying things for what they are, not for where they can take you. So in the midst of your life, there's this constant calculus we do of what is this thing going to get me to next? How can I maneuver this situation to get where I need to go next? Constant calculation. And when the rest gets into your souls, you realize, what am I trying to do? I'm just trying to amass control over my life. I'm trying to amass this sort of gain. And that's why you get frustrated half the time when it doesn't work, because half the time or more, it doesn't work. And so what you end up doing now, when the gospel's in your heart and you're sort of going, well, I'm a human, in here somewhere is a gift. You don't all of a sudden start loving all the inconveniences in your work or your life. But you start saying things like, well, no matter how much I put in, it wasn't necessarily going to correspond with the gain I got anyway. I mean, half the time, whether or not you get a promotion, whether or not you get a raise, whether or not things work out, has nothing to do with how much work you put in. We've seen that all over the place. No, it gives you a rest under your work. So while you toil, for example, when your work, let's use a job example, when your work, all of a sudden, you got to stay late till 3 a.m. because someone messed something up or something went sideways, and now here you are. There's a couple ways to handle that. One is, let's get this done so I can get out of here and get home, and I'm going to maneuver this, and you do that, and you stop doing that slowly, and come over here. I'm going to figure this thing out and get out of here, because I know where I need to be. That's one way to handle that. That's how most of us handle it. The other way is not to be not to whistle and go, oh, nothing's wrong. No, it's lame to be there at 3 a.m. Very clearly, very biblical answer. Nope, not great. But to say, well, it's kind of cool to be able to work, I guess. Who knows how this is going to turn out, but it's kind of nice to be able to work. Very similar to how right now, I look back at my previous 37 years of life and think, it was so wonderful to have 2 functional feet. It's just so great. Why wasn't I ever happy about that while I was walking on them? Only now, it's such a common experience, but isn't that the case? We're always thinking about where we're going to go next. When you're freed up with rest in your soul, you think about where you are now. And there's so much to enjoy now. That takes us to the next one. You actually counterintuitively find yourself free to work harder than you worked before. A lot of times you hear this and you think, okay, so the thing that pushes people to be their best is pressure and fear. That's the idea. The more afraid I am, the more hungry I get. I'm going to go out there and kill it in the work world. I got to get all this. And that's, if that pressure's off, I'm just going to sit back and be lazy and passive. I need the pressure. It's actually not true at all. Chariots of Fire, old movie, right? You have the two racers. Harold Abrams is one of them. How does he think of racing? I have 10 seconds, he says, to justify my existence. Do you think his mental energy is fully on the running? And then what does Eric Liddell come along? He says, God made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. He didn't stop running. If anything, he ran harder, and so can you. Do you see? There's a way of working on things in your life where you're coming from a place of rest. There's a rest under the work. And so you're free to work hard. You're not so consumed by striving that you're distracted by all the psychological, emotional toll it takes, wondering if it's really going to work out. The safety of the gospel lets you work hard. Last, you find yourself enjoying things you overlooked before. Zach Eswine wrote on Ecclesiastes, and he had this little parable called The Important Man. He says, a toddler asks an important man, who also happens to be the toddler's dad, to go to the park. The important man has important things on his important mind. Riding a bike to the park, sliding down slides, playing tag, getting food together seems like a waste of important time. The important man either does not take the time, or he does so unhappily and distracted, out of obligation, his mind elsewhere, and no sense of God for the moment of his lot. Okay, at this point, it's just cats in the cradle. We've been here before, but listen to what he says next. The preacher's words are a gracious provision from God for the important man. The important man begins to pray for seemingly unimportant things. He prays that God would empower him to slide on a slide, to play tag, to listen and hear his son, and to splash fountain water on each other. The grace of wisdom begins to open all the windows in his life. Every little thing in his lot is becoming a means of potential joy and fellowship that God can give amongst the normal stresses and frustrations under the sun. His family, his work, his food, his place, all become something to pray about for the empowerment of God's joy in them. Right now, you are I am so laser focused on our immortality project that we are missing like billions of gifts that are flying by us every day. And what this opens us up to, the rest under the work, is to be able to take our eyes off of that one door and have God's gracious wisdom open all the windows in our life. We begin to pray for fascinating things like how to slide down a slide, or how to find a little bit of joy in an expense report, how to be happy with a good sandwich or maybe a mediocre one. All sorts of amazing, do you think of what life could be for you if you had that kind of rest, if your heart was able to lie down. Work cannot give you that. Achievement cannot give you that. But God can. And that's the lesson of Ecclesiastes. In New York, outside the RCA building, this big statue of Atlas. You've probably seen it in TV shows. It's kind of all over the place. It's right around 30 Rock. And he's just got the whole world on his shoulders, and he's just straining, and you could see that he's not happy. Like, the look on his face is clearly not happy. But he's holding the world up. He's getting it done. And right across the street is St. Patrick's Cathedral. You walk inside, go around a little corner, and there's a tiny little statue of a little boy Jesus holding the world in his hand. No stress at all. And it's an architectural illustration for us. It's an architectural question. Which life do you want? Do you want to hold the whole thing up through your achievements and have it break your back? Or do you want to look to the gospel, where Jesus gives up his rest so you can have it, and be someone who looks to him and says, you clearly have this taken care of. I'm happy to just be human under someone who loves me so much. What do you have next today? I bet it's going to be okay. Okay, let's pray. Father, we want eyes like this, and it's hard to have them. There's a lot of projects that clamor for our attention, even though we do often know better. But it's a siren call, and we do hear it, and it draws us to it. We don't want it, though. There's much more rest in Jesus, and we're very grateful and thankful and happy that you have given him to us the way that you have. We're glad that he can give us rest for weary and burdened souls. We pray that you would give rest to our weary and burdened souls now as we think on the cross and the empty tomb, on the love that he has for us, and come together as your family in him to sing, to worship, and to go live our lives in the world of yours, which is a gift, even amidst all the normal stresses and frustrations. We give you praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you for listening to Cornerstone West Los Angeles. For more information, please visit us on the web at cornerstonewla.org.